Okay, third time of trying to record this video. I want to talk about how to aim the game. And I'm going to just let this play out. We'll skip it ahead later. But the idea is we're going to... well, that's cool. Anyway, we're going to try and teach the game backwards from start to finish. And I'm picking this up because it's easier to teach games from the way that it's supposed to look at the end. Previous move. What? Okay. Fine. Black king. This is the first ending I learned for chess. And, oh gosh, went back to the Dota. Okay, and this is the first ending I learned for chess. Stop going back to Dota, game. Thank you. I learned this because it gives a picture of what it's supposed to look like. And instead of having all the pieces arranged here where you have almost an infinite number of possible moves, even more so when you play games like Go, where you can play on one of 19 by 19 is, oh man, I can't do math. It's like 390 different possible opening moves. You get this idea of what you should be able to aim for, and the idea is just get down to two pieces plus not lose your king. King can't move anywhere other than on this line, and then on the next line he wins. And then the game says game is over, try again. I can't change anything. And then we start to look at this more complicated game, and we see we don't even have to kill our opponent. Like, my opponent here is trying to surround me completely and try and kill off these sets of stones and then try and stay alive in this area. And for those of you who haven't played, let's just say black plays here, white plays here, and then black plays here. My opponent now gets all three of these stones. But that's not going to happen. That's not what actually ends up running through, because I can just play here as white. And now I have all these stones. So these stones aren't actually threatening to capture anything. They're not threatening to kill anybody. And the game just kind of fizzles out. So if we go back to the game, all the stones that he ended up playing on this side of the board are dead because they don't have any way of surviving contextually, and they don't have any other options other than just dying. And that's what we're trying to do for Dota. We're trying to make it so that our opponents don't have any options, and it doesn't matter what they do, they just lose the game. So if I go back into Dota and I give myself some stuff, free cooldowns, and then go fast. The first thing that we need to do, or I think what I should do, is I should tell you the 3 military tactics that we're going to use in order to overwhelm them and take their ancient. Because we all know that to win the game, you have to take their ancient. But we've all had the games after our first maybe 10 or 20 where you kill the tier 2, they're still dead, and then you try and walk up high ground, and then their reinforcements come and they kill you off. We're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to do 3 simple things. First, we're going to siege. We're going to take control of this area and starve them out. Doesn't matter if it's the Dire Outpost jungle or if it's the triangle area, because if you're on Dire, it's going to be opposite. But for now, we're saying Radiant. We're going to take control of their jungle and starve them of farm. We're going to take this lane and make sure that they can't walk up and do anything. If they do that, they lose a hero, they lose multiple heroes, whatever they're going to do, they don't get to farm 2 lanes. Which means our opponents are farming 1 lane and 1 jungle. If we count the amount of farm that they're getting, where is this? That's Ancients, 170 plus 100 plus 60. So that's 330 plus creep wave worth 140 times 2. So it's about 500 something gold per minute divided by 5 heroes. And it's not split evenly because carries are going to get more and supports are going to get less, but we're just going to say for the team, this is 500 gold. Now if we look over here, we have 2 creep waves. 240 times 2 is 560 plus 3 medium camps at 80 each. That's 240 plus 560. So that's 780 something plus a large camp. So like 800 gold from 2 creep waves and 5 camps, or 4 camps. You can maybe add this as an extra camp, but it's not a big deal. It's about the same amount of farm here, but the difference here is the extra creep wave. 2 creep waves to 1 creep wave. That's what we're trying to get. On top of that, we're trying to take Roche. Because if you take Roche, you have an additional... If I can kill him.
Make a splash. From sea to shore.
It's very loud for me, by the way.
We'll sing harmony.
Um,
Bottom tower is under attack. Roshan has fallen to the radiant.
so now we take Roche. Enemy doesn't get Roche. So now we've choked them out of this area of the map. We've removed this objective that is neutral for both teams. And then
Slither hither.
we walk up and we do with this high ground. So far we've done a siege where we've starved them of resources. Then we have used Scorched Earth and completely removed this as an option for them. We've removed Roche and we've removed these camps. Then we walk up and we assault their base. We don't even need to kill them. We just need to make sure that the barracks aren't here, and we need to make sure that the tower's not here. If you can only do one thing, take the tower and leave, because eventually they need to put a hero here. Otherwise, the creeps will crash into the barracks, and the barracks will start taking damage.
Tower is under attack.
There.
Radiant structures are
Oh,
fortified.
I can just continuously fortify. Cool. Anyway,
Middle tower is
once these go down, and they have to put a hero here, the creeps are stronger. And this means that supports, who normally were clearing creep waves from towers or de-pushing, don't have the damage to be able to push the wave back. So now they have to put their mid laner or they have to put their carry in a lane where the creeps give less golden experience. The super creeps, once you've removed these 2 towers, are worth about half the amount of gold and experience. So now their carry is losing farm because this tower and these 2 creep waves are gone. If they don't do that and they're trying to catch up, which will sometimes happen, where the carry moves to the complete opposite side of the map and starts sitting behind the tier 3 force and trying to force rotations back to the base so that the enemy team can start taking a fight in this jungle, eventually the super creeps are going to start taking these buildings, start taking these buildings in the mid lane, and then they start to lose their ancient. So what we're trying to do is restrict the number of options they have in order to come back into the game. And if you have mega creeps, suddenly you're farming twice the amount of gold and experience they are, regardless of what lanes that you're in. If you're just trading farm equally, the game is saying, no, your opponents don't get any farm. So we've removed one option of coming back, and we've removed Roche so that they have less options of fighting us. And before we leave, we clear off all these camps so that they're behind by a minute, maybe 2 minutes if we block them with sentries, which isn't necessarily a good idea, but you can do that if you're going to leave the area. And then we just move to the other 2 lanes. And now we starve them of farm. Instead of doubling their farm, we're almost tripling it because they've reduced this down to 140 gold per minute, and we're still farming 560. They still get these extra camps, but it's not a big deal. It's one extra camp, but the ancients make up for it. So the idea here is you remove their fortifications, you take their farm away, and then the game eventually just collapses in on them where they can't leave their base. They don't have any items that they can recover from. They can't afford to buy BKB. They can't afford to buy damage. They can't afford to buy HP. They can't afford to buy regen. And then you start trying to force out things like buyback. Right now I don't have buyback, but if I give myself a bunch of gold, have to refresh it. Now I have buyback. And when we do an assault, we're not trying to kill them all. We're just trying to get maybe one or two buybacks out of them, or we're just trying to get fortify out of them. And by doing this, it limits the amount of resources that they can use to fight us back. So if we get rid of buyback, now they don't have respawn for 70, 80 seconds, or if it's a dieback where they've already bought back once, now they're dead for 100, maybe 150 seconds, and then the game is basically over. So when you're trying to assault, when you're trying to siege, when you're trying to use Scorched Earth, the only resources the only condition is that you're burning their resources faster than you're burning yours. Or at least trying to remove the resources that they can replenish. So even if you're losing more resources going in, as long as they don't have options to recover and you do, then the game is over. We can talk about items that let you do these things, but in general, we're trying to clear off these barracks. We're trying to clear off the towers so that they have to sit here farming inefficiently, and we get to farm efficiently wherever we want on the map. We prevent them from farming anywhere else on the map, and then we just repeat until they start running out of resources. Because eventually, if you've started the process where you've taken one lane of racks, they don't have the golds or experience to keep up with you, because now they can't invade your high ground because you've got vision. These are choke points. And then if you have the outposts, this is reinforcements. If you have boost of travel, you have reinforcements this way.
Yes.
If you have things like, I don't know, let's just buy heart. Damn it. Heart. There we go. And then I go...
Slitherly.
Your middle tower is under attack.
Do.
Cut to the chase. Any way you cut.
And now I have a 76 healing per second. So at the end of the fight, if I want to, I can just back off, and it takes me something like 20 seconds to reset. Doesn't show my cooldown, but 28 seconds for mirror image. If they bring me down to 100 HP, it takes me 20 seconds, and my mirror images respawn after 28 seconds. And if I don't have normal and WTF, I think that works.
It's me.
23 seconds to a 28 second uptime. 22, 18. So there's like 3 seconds of downtime in terms of this. And by that time, I'm full HP with the Heart of Tarrasque. You can also do things like buy Satanic, which lets you mid-fight heal up completely. And some heroes, like traditional carries like Terrorblade, Monkey King, have means of healing naturally. So you don't even have to worry about the regen. And then you can just continuously put pressure on them without having to leave. Without having to go back to base for healing. If I don't have Heart of Tarrasque, if I do this, there we go. 300 something if I drop it.
Yes.
230. So Heart of Tarrasque alone is basically me sitting in Fountain, but it's on the battlefield. Oh,
Your top tower is under
I'm just gonna pause the game and we're gonna leave it at that. The idea here is we're trying to get to a point where they can't kill us, where they can't buy any way of killing us, and they can't buy any way of not dying, and they run out of buybacks. They run out of experience. They have no option of getting Roche. They have no option of walking up these high grounds. No option of bypassing choke points. So even if they push us out of this area, if they can't recover because we've removed their farm options, and they can't push fast enough to get the super creeps or the mega creeps to get under our towers, the creeps in the game itself will just naturally push all of the lanes into them, and we could just sit AFK in our base for 20-30 minutes while they try and do something. Not exactly the most exciting way of winning the game, but by reducing our opponent's options, it's the same as if we were playing Go or chess, and the game ends with either the resignation because they've recognized, okay, I can't do anything unless my opponent makes a mistake, and this is such a simple problem that they're not going to make a mistake here. But we can talk about this more when we look at heroes, because each hero has their own way of ending the game. So I'm going to end up leaving this disconnect. Come on. Game has been so slow. But each hero has their own way of ending the game, and it's because they have ways of dealing with things like Black King Bar. They have ways of resetting their HP, like I was talking about with Terrorblade. They have ways of doing damage without needing their spells. If the game ends earlier, we can talk about items that maybe don't scale as well, but still do things. Like if you get a MKB, it costs less than a Daedalus. It gives you more attack speed. So this is more generally useful in a mid-game timing where you're trying to end the game maybe 25-30 minutes. But this is more effective against just doing damage, because once they get BKB, it doesn't block the critical strike, but if they have BKB, it blocks the MKB, and that can swing the fight significantly. And sometimes it's worth it, even on support, if you can afford a BKB and you're just getting completely destroyed in the fight, but you need to be alive and doing damage. Getting a BKB just to turn the fight can be sometimes worth it. There's cheaper options like Yules for the 3 seconds of immunity while your spells are on cooldown, or you can get maybe you can get a Ghost Scepter where you're immune to physical damage for 4 seconds, but the idea still stands. You get something that gives you defensive options against whatever they buy. So as the game goes on, if you neglect some of these later game options like Abyssal Blade or Nullifier, if they have things like Ghost Scepter or Yules, having things like Scythe of Vice means that they can't BKB if you go for a kill attempt, or they can't use any items to try and stop you, and they have this decreased movement speed. And usually in the late game, 4 seconds of 3.5, whatever, 4 seconds of complete disable means that their hero is just going to die to whatever physical damage and nukes that you throw at them. You can get things like Silver Edge that disables passives, so whatever passive they're relying on, as long as you disable them a little bit, they don't get to fight back. Whatever damage they have gets thrown out the window when they get stunned, and they're relying on their passives to slow you from hitting them or deter you from hitting them in the case of like a Spectre or a Bristleback. But if we go things like Orchid, all they have to do is get a Yules, they can get a Lotus, they can get maybe a Lincoln's, they can get Aeon Disc, they can get Greaves, wherever those are, and they can just cast a basic dispel, and suddenly this Orchid isn't as strong, and even Bloodthorn, even though it gives you a bunch of stats, it's still relying on the fact that you have this silence. So what you're trying to do is prevent them from hitting these points where it's harder to kill them. So if you can delay their manta timing, suddenly they can't deal with you getting an Orchid, and then without the manta, they can't show on a creep wave. But now if you're restricting them to one creep wave, and there's 4 heroes that suddenly need a dispel, Grieve costs 5,000. We've said that would take 10 minutes for their entire team. If it would take 10 minutes if one person was taking all the farm that was left on the map. Manta, again, 10 minutes for their team. Lotus, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. 3 minutes. This is a hard dispel, which is nice. BKB, 4 minutes. It would mean that they have one hero that they can rely on to potentially come back into the game. And even that may not be enough, because the enemy team, or you, can match whatever they're doing. They can have one hero farming 500 gold per minute, and you can have one hero farming 700, 800 gold per minute. And when we start look at late game carries, they do things like farm creep waves really quickly. They have an ability to not die as long as they have maybe 1 or 2 items, or at least 1 item ahead, and then they just kill everybody because they have so much damage. And when we start to look at endgame, this comes into effect a lot more when you're playing support, because you start to think about where on the map you need to control to start reducing the enemy's farm. And if they don't have a hero that can farm ancients, and you start to restrict them to only farming the triangle, then that makes the game a lot harder for them, even if you're not immediately ending the game. So in order to recap here, you end the game using 3 military tactics. You siege, you scorched earth to remove their options, and you do an assault. A lot of people, when I say siege, they get the wrong idea, where they hear siege and they think, I'm going to walk up high ground and start hitting things. But a siege is you just sit somewhere, you threaten force, and it means they can't enter that area or they can't leave. Then we have the scorched earth, which is basically the same as a siege, where you're choking out their resources, but instead of actually having to use force, you can just leave because there's no resources there to begin with. And then when we talk about assault, we're not going in there to kill them. We're going in there to remove things like buyback, which requires you to kill them, but they just respond with buyback anyway. You go in there to remove their towers, because the towers prevent the creeps from hitting the barracks, and you remove things like barracks. And this reduces the farm that they can get from that lane in half. So you're further removing the resources from the map that the enemy team can farm. And then you start to get items that require additional items from the enemy team in order to recover. So if you suddenly have like an Abyssal Blade, and the enemy can't farm a Lincoln's, or an Aeon Disc, or a Heart, or something that lets them survive the 2 seconds of disable, then even if they had the BKB, even if they have like a Daedalus, it doesn't matter. Even if they get a Rapier, it doesn't matter. They just die and they can't farm anymore because they can't show on the map. And if they do walk out of base, you can just kill them. And the last thing that I want to talk about is, it's not here, it's right here. Smoke. We're talking about the idea of you're occupying the space on the jungle. And I'm saying it's kind of like setting up your own base on their side of the map, where there's vision advantage, there's reinforcement advantage if you have things like boost of travel, or you have the outpost, and then you have these choke points where if the enemy tries to walk up those hills, not only can they not see you, but they're also funneling into a small space where your AoE things like Echo Slam and fissure and reverse polarity will hit as many people as possible. Smoke is the way you get past at least that vision advantage when you're not, like, when the enemy isn't sitting on that hill, or they're not sitting on those stairs. Because if you read through it, it says disguise grants invisibility that is immune to true sight, which means if they have an observer ward, they have a sentry ward, or if they have a tower, and you walk past that tower, as long as the smoke doesn't break, they don't see you. So these observer wards and these sentry wards do nothing against the smoke. The difference here is this responds less frequently than the sentry and less frequently than the observer, and any hero nearby requires you to respond. And I've played a couple low MMR games, and I run out of slots for smokes, and I give a smoke to one of my supports, and they get gone on, and they just press smoke because it's like, oh, it makes me invisible, and they start hitting the button, and it just breaks because there's a hero on top of them, and they smoke, and then the smoke of deceit disappears. This is the most aggressive item you can purchase in Dota that allows you to bypass any defenses that they have on the map other than sitting a hero on top of a staircase. So as long as you have item advantage and you have a smoke and you've removed all of their resources, then you siege, you remove the camps that they can farm, you remove Roche, and then you assault their buildings and force out buybacks, then the game will just kind of end for them because they don't have the gold needed to trade with you. So as the game goes on, you farm maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes, whatever it takes for your team to all get buybacks, and the boots of travel required to instantly show up to the fight again. And then you can just walk up high ground and then trade HP damage, and eventually you'll just win because you have more HP damage and reinforcements that can come into the fight. The problem is your teammates aren't going to listen to you, but you not following them into a bad forced mid after tier 2 is the best way you can have to impact the game and win, at least in terms of late game. And then you can start to think about whether or not you have the items that negate things like BKB, negate things like Orchid I was talking about, negate things like Desolator, having more resources than them. This is a good place to start. You can get Assault Cuirass, Lincoln's, Lotus. Having these endgame items gives you the ability to end the fight or end the game. And even if you're not actually killing them, they can't do anything about you slowly encroaching on them. And that's what I'd like you to start thinking about. You don't have to kill them. You just have to remove any option they have of coming back into the game. And if you found this helpful, you can either subscribe to my YouTube channel, or I've also got a, if I can find it on my Streamlabs. I've also got a Discord that you can join, where we talk about different things that you'd like to see from me, and we can go into more detail later. At least you can suggest heroes that you'd like to see, but I'd like to get more people in that Discord and asking questions. Hopefully this helps. Thanks, and see you next time. Bye.